What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. The clock is ticking, Ryan Talbot. We are a couple days away from the start of the new league year, the official legal tampering period starts on Monday. We're 6 days away. So I thought, let's kick off this week by going through some of our favorite ideas in free agency, talk about some of the players that make sense, the positions that the Bills might choose to address early, some of the capital that they might want to use if they free up enough space, and where that's best utilized. And then we'll talk about a couple of the Bills' own free agents and what we think in terms of who will be back, the market for them, so on and so forth. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. Yeah, exciting times, just get out of the NFL Combine. Now, legal tampering window just a few days away. Plenty to talk about.
So I think the best place to start is on a couple of wide receivers. I mean, of course, wide receivers, free agency. I feel like you can start there every year with this Bills team, but a couple of them have been in the news the last couple of days. You think about Mike Evans, who's been linked to the Bills by several reports coming out of the Combine. It looks like he's probably the closest he's ever been to leaving Tampa Bay. I want to get into that because I think where I've landed is that's my favorite idea, but it comes with a couple of caveats. Rashid Shaheed out of Seattle, also rumored to be on the radar of the Buffalo Bills. So let's start with you. When it comes to wide receiver, what is your number one favorite free agent idea? And I'm not talking about trade idea. That's like a separate conversation. If the Bills are going to make a splash in free agency with the guys that are available right now, who do you like?
Yeah, it's Mike Evans. And we were naming players back and forth, and I got this one. We were kind of in an agreement on Mike Evans. Alec Pierce did not get tagged. I could make an argument for him, but I think that he's going to get a lot of money despite being a little bit unproven in terms of his all-around game. Obviously, Alec Pierce is great as a downfield threat, could be great in that regard for what the Bills have lacked as of late, but all-around game, it's hard to find someone who's been more consistent than Mike Evans. His 1,000-yard streak came to an end this past year due to injuries, but he's been very healthy throughout his career. He has been someone that produces every year despite a lot of changes at the quarterback position over his career in Tampa Bay. It's been stable there the last few years with Baker Mayfield, obviously. But he's someone that, despite the quarterback play, despite how good the team is, he always is able to fill that stat line and at the end of the year go over 1,000 yards. So where I think he is career-wise, what I think his price point's going to be, and then the fact that the Bills meet all of his criteria based on what was reported is another reason why I'm so high in Mike Evans.
For me, I'm right there with you when it comes to Evans. I think he still, even at 32 years old, of the crop of wide receivers, and that's including Alec Pierce, is still the best. There's obviously injury concerns, but I think if you bring him in as wide receiver one, right, and you have Keon Coleman, you have Joshua Palmer, Tyrell Shavers will get back sometime next year, and then you address the position in a very deep draft at wide receiver, I think you could bring in Mike Evans and still draft two wide receivers and kind of figure it out on the other side. If you draft two wide receivers and both of them are really good throughout the summer and into training camp in the preseason, then maybe you're starting to think about offloading somebody. Are you trading a Josh Palmer? Are you trading a Keon Coleman? All those things are on the table, but I feel like if you grab Mike Evans, he would be the best wide receiver that Josh Allen has played with since Stephon Diggs. And I also think that he would be coming to a team that is hyper-focused on figuring out a way to maximize players on the roster health-wise, right? They're coming off of 2 years where the injuries have piled up. Mike Evans is going to come in here and be on vet rest days to the moon. Like, this guy is going to be asked to practice once or twice a week and play on Sundays. I think they'd probably take it really easy with him all throughout this summer. The other thing I like about the Mike Evans potential idea is that there are certain levers that you can pull. We've talked about Taron Johnson in the show several times as a cut candidate this offseason. Pre-June 1st doesn't make a lot of sense. You get $2 million. Post-June 1st, you can get, I think, about $8 to $9 million in cap space You bring in Mike Evans, and maybe teams that aren't willing to negotiate right now in terms of trading a wide receiver, there's a bunch that we've talked about that are still kind of being bantied about. Maybe that's something that comes up in season where you're able to kind of add another wide receiver to the mix. But Mike Evans, to me, at least the starting position at the wide receiver room immediately is better than it was a year ago if he's on the roster.
Yeah, significantly better. And for anyone asking about the criteria, supposedly Mike Evans wants to play on a team where the quarterback he believes in, a chance at a Super Bowl, a top shelf offensive coordinator, and the promise of high volume touches. Now, obviously, quarterback he believes in, Josh Allen, would certainly check that box. Chance at a Super Bowl. The Bills year in, year out have been a contender. Top shelf offensive coordinator. The Bills under Joe Brady have been in top 5, top 10 offense bowl seasons there. The only thing you'd really have to sell him on is the high volume touches, that you would be able to get him that ball to make sure that he can get his touches, his catches, his stats, while all still trying to be somewhat of that everyone eats mentality.
The hard part of the Mike Evans situation is the number, because there are a bunch of numbers going around. I mean, we love Mike Giannetti. Spottrack.com is usually where I kind of start and rely upon. He's got him is valued at 2 years, $26 million for a potential contract. I saw one free agent listing that thinks that he could get upwards of 2 years and $51 million if he decides to leave Tampa. And I think at that kind of number, I'm probably out. But I'm much more comfortable with like a 12, 13 million per season, a deal that you can get the number kind of down low this first year. And I think there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to be done here by Brandon Beane to set up the salary cap for 27 and 28 with some of the decisions he makes with the roster right now. I'm okay with Mike Evans at the next 2 years at around 12 or 13 million, especially if that number's a little bit lower up front in 2026.
Yeah, I love that price point, the talent, knowing that he's at the tail end of his career, but you can still get that value out of him. You mentioned it, best receiver that Josh Allen will have had since Stephon Diggs. They need to address that, and the draft is just too much of a crapshoot. There's going to be some guys in free agency that maybe go for a little bit too much money. I could see Evans falling into that bucket, though, of being at the right price point, the talent level still being at a very high level, and then helping this Bills offense, which, that's been their Achilles heel in terms of the offense side of the ball, not having that go-to receiver.
I think this is going to be unpopular with a lot of Bills fans, but I want to explain a little bit why I'm maybe not as high on the ideas of some of those like tier down wide receivers that are going to probably be affordable. Similar to that number we just threw out there for Evans, probably a little bit less. Romeo Doubs and Rashid Shaheed to me are the two. Of the two, I think Shaheed would be somebody I'd be much more willing to spend on. I'm worried about Dobbs because doesn't it feel like the Bills have kind of lived in this place before with Curtis Samuel, with Josh Palmer, 2 straight off seasons. Now, Dobbs is a different receiver. Maybe he comes in here and is able to find a little bit more consistency in this offense. But what's to say that those opportunities are available in this offense for a guy like Dobbs, who was like a roller coaster in production in Green Bay? And I would much more rather spend $13 million on Mike Evans, knowing what you're getting as a guy coming in here that commands the kind of consistent production and attention by Josh Allen in this offense, over a Dobbs who to me fits into the same bucket as a Curtis Samuel. Like Curtis Samuel was like better coming here from Washington than I think Dobbs has been over the last couple of years in Green Bay. Shaheed, I'm not going to judge him too much on that second half run in Seattle. He had a couple of nice performances, a couple of nice big plays. But I think if you go that route, I'd much rather spend a second and a fourth or a fifth on 2 wide receivers in the draft and try to get a similar skill set than overpay in free agency for a Romeo Doubs or Rashid Shaheed.
And I like Romeo Doubs. I think that in the right system, the right fit, he really can take off and be a productive receiver. But there's that risk involved, like you said, with the way the Bills have been burnt the last 2 times with Curtis Samuel and Joshua Palmer. And Palmer, obviously, injuries this past year took a big toll on him after that Atlanta game. The 2 seasons with Curtis Samuel, it's been nothing but injuries. Dobbs has been productive, but I do think it speaks volumes that Green Bay is letting him walk. I know they have some young talent there. They have some other – they seem to always kind of just add a few players in the draft and try to develop that way. And Dobbs, to his credit, has had some really nice seasons. But the fact you're letting him walk says – that maybe they feel like that money can be invested somewhere else and be invested better. So I do have some, qualms about him, and even Alec Pierce, who I think is going to be in a much higher tier in terms of the money he could potentially get if he doesn't end up staying with the Colts. There's just so much risk there. You're basing it on the downfield play, the big play ability, but you also want someone that you can count on consistently in games, not just for those shots here and there. And I don't know enough if Alec Pierce can do that game in and game out.
There's so many different flavors of wide receiver in the draft that get you guys that can separate, like boundary X receivers, more Z receivers, the guys that are probably a little bit more gadgety, like a Casey Concepcion or something like that. But I see a comment in here about like there's risk that goes into drafting wide receivers too. Sure, but it's a much lower risk because of the cost that comes associated with it. This would be the third straight offseason where if the Bills were to sign one of these kind of guys in this tier, that they're going back to the same well. And I'd like them to go, I'd rather them sit out free agency completely and take a big swing via trade than I would have them go and sign like a middling guy. Now, the one idea I will say that I kind of like a little bit, and people are not going to like this because I don't think there's any excitement that comes with this particular player, but I think the price point is going to be something lower than even Shaheed or Dobbs gets, and it's going to probably be on a 1-year deal. And that's Deebo Samuel, who the Bills were reportedly in on at the trade deadline last year. Injury issues, check. Production spikes, check. All of the issues that you have, older receiver, somebody that, probably his best days are behind them, but I'd much rather take Deebo Samuel on a 1-year deal with an incentive-laden contract that gets you in the door for a cap hit around $3 or $4 million than I would a cap hit that's kind of getting up into 7, 8, 9 for any of those other two guys. I still prefer the Evans deal, but I like something in that area a little bit more. And let me throw another name at you that I think I like more, especially if the price point comes in lower, especially year one. Jalen Naylor out of Minnesota. The last couple of years, kind of been that third wheel in the Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison triangle. He's got some juice. He's got some speed. He's got some route running ability. He is kind of a guy that apparently is getting a lot of buzz. That's some of the reports that were coming out of Indy last week, up to 10 teams that are interested in talking to his representatives. That could be a name on the outside that will cost a little bit less that I think you can get excited about.
Yeah, and Jalen Naylor, my only concerns there is how much of his production when he was in Minnesota had to do with the guys that were around him. What happens when he steps away from a Justin Jefferson, especially a Justin Jefferson caliber type of player, and then comes to Buffalo where the responsibilities and the expectations are going to be risen, and he's not going to have that player that takes all that attention away. I'm not trying to downplay Naylor's game. I think that maybe he does go away from Minnesota and shows that he is a capable number 2, number 3 type of wide receiver in this league. But there's always something to be said about players that come from teams where they have a superstar that helps alleviate a little bit of the attention that goes with being a receiver and running those routes and maybe not having the best players on you.
Go back to, I'm going to finish the wide receiver spot with this last player that I'm going to go back to the beginning because he's somebody I was talking about with Mike Giannetti on our podcast that started at the beginning of the offseason, and that's Christian Kirk. And if you look at his total numbers from last season, they're not going to blow you away. I mean, he started 3 games, played in 13 total for Houston with an offense that was kind of up and down. CJ Stroud had his struggles. Davis Mills came in and played a bunch of games. His final stat line on the year was 28 catches, 239 yards, and a touchdown. And that's obviously not going to blow you away by any stretch of the imagination. But I like him as a potential low-cost option based solely on my own eyes, watching him down the stretch in a couple key games. Look at go back and watch his game against Pittsburgh Steelers in the wild card round, 30-6 win for the Texans. He was unguardable in that game. He had 8 catches for 144 yards and a touchdown. The next week against a tough New England Patriots team, 2 catches, 20 yards, and another touchdown in that game. In the biggest of the season, Christian Kirk raised his level of play. And I think you're going to get him at a pretty good number. He has a really close relationship with Josh Allen. They vacation together in the offseason. That's somebody I think could be in play. If you're considering like maybe a Brandon Cooks and his number gets to a point where you're a little bit too high, because I like that again as another option as somebody who had some success for you last year. Christian Kirk kind of hits that same bucket for me.
Yeah, Kirk is an intriguing player because we're not that many years removed from him being a high ticket priced item in free agency and being out of the Bills' range, despite there being reports of maybe the Bills trying to pursue him. Now you get him coming out of this down year. You know the talent is there. You saw the production in the playoffs. You'd be going to a much better quarterback situation. Buying low on a player like that, I'm not against the idea at all. It just comes down to realistic expectations because no matter what the fan base is, if that team goes out and signs Christian Kirk, for instance, as the first receiver that they sign in free agency, fans are going to lose it on some teams saying like, this guy's not a number one receiver. He's not, but he can be a very valuable addition to Buffalo's wide receiver room where they can then supplement that with a draft pick or two or make a trade still, whether that's now or post June 1st when some other contracts might have to come off the books for teams. So, we're not sitting here saying all of these guys can come in and assume a massive role, but Kirk, based on what he's done in his career, based on how he looked this postseason, I think he'd come in here and assume a larger role for this offense.
We'll get into some of the Bills free agents at the end of the episode. We'll do a quick fire through who we think has a real chance to get back. And one might surprise you. I've been thinking a little bit more about this, and I thought he'd probably be gone, but I think there's one name out there that I think a lot of people are expecting to be gone that might be back. We'll get to that. Last thought on receiver. I think trades are definitely in play, Ryan. And I think for me, we did a whole episode on the wide receiver trades. We're both all in on the idea of Brian Thomas Jr. If that ends up materializing, the price is right. Sign me up for that deal. Sign me up for Jalen Waddle too. And I don't think like right now the reports are that Jalen Waddle is untouchable and Devon Achane is untouchable. Balderdash. I don't believe it for 1 second, because here's the deal. If the Miami Dolphins in June and they get to training camp or whenever it is, and they don't like their quarterback situation and they want to start stocking up for the 2027 draft, which is going to, conceivably have some pretty good quarterback prospects in it, most notably maybe the top prize in Arch Manning. I think that if you waive your 2027 first round pick for Jalen Waddle, that might be something that gets whoever the new Miami Dolphins GM excited about it. And so I think there's a ton of potential trade ideas, and I think it's starting the new league year all the way through the trade deadline. I'm not ruling out, and of course, you love the Bills to pull the trigger on that before the season. But I think at some point, if you wanted to tell me the Bills were going to make a trade for a wide receiver, no matter what they do this offseason in free agency or the draft, I'd buy it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I buy it. Waddle, I could actually be seeing him as more of a trade deadline candidate to be traded. I think they hold on to him early, but then when they see that they're in play for the top pick, or near the top pick, and they could get another first round asset like you mentioned, maybe that would cause them to move on from him, give you the ammo to move up to get the quarterback of your choice, whether that's Manning or someone else.
All right, let's move to the defensive side of the ball. We'll pop back over to offensive line because I got a couple of, I tried to do the Connor McGovern exercise. Like if McGovern and Edwards leave, who are some potential options that the Bills can look at in free agency to bring in on a lower end deal and hope to really get the most out of them in this system. Now with Pat Meyer here taking over for Aaron Cromer, Joe Brady has seen it done up close and personal with some of the guys they brought in over the last couple of years. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I want to start with defensive tackle because the guy that I pulled out is your, I think, top target here, and that's John Franklin Myers. I'm wondering what the sell job is going to have to be from the Bills to get him, because it seems like he's all but assuredly going to Tennessee to rejoin Robert Saleh. He's got a bunch of buddies playing up there, apparently. Like, what do you feel like is the defensive tackle that you have at the top of your list? If it is Franklin Myers or somebody else?
Well, I'm thinking of the 3-4 where you can also play on the end a little bit too. But Franklin Myers is one of my two guys, and we were talking about our who would you love to see the Bills target in free agency? You've seen him come into Denver and just kind of take over since being traded there from the Jets. And I just need to see the Bills get playmakers at all three levels. That's what makes a good defense go. You need those guys. And John Franklin Myers, the last few seasons in Denver, has been one of those guys. I'm going to pull it up right here. I did an article probably a month or so ago, but since joining the Broncos, which that was not Jim Leonard's defense. He was there. He had a hand in it, obviously. Franklin Myers had 14 and a half sacks with 33 quarterback hits, 14 tackles for loss in his 2 seasons there. So he is someone that fits the mold of that 3-4 defense of what the Bills could be trying to do, get someone that can wreak havoc up front. So for that reason, I would love to bring him in. Here's the problem, though. In terms of guys that are probably going to get multi-year deals, he's on a very short list because a lot of the other players that are, true defensive tackles, things like that, are older veterans that might be signing on a 1-year deal. He is the premier player of those D linemen that I could see the Bills trying to target to bring in here. And that alone is an issue when you're looking at Buffalo's cap situation.
I love Franklin Myers. I think that if you can land him, I don't know if there'd be a number that would necessarily scare me away. But I think if you're looking for like a tier down from that, because I think he's probably the top interior player on the free agent market right now, you're probably looking at a David, and I'm going to say his name wrong, Onyemata out of Atlanta. I like him a lot. Like, talk about like position versatility, can play that typical nose tackle role in a 3-4 defense, can kind of line up outside on passing situations, pair him up with Ed Oliver if the Bills do decide to hang on to him. And it looks like all reports say that they will. But of course, as we get closer, free agency also, this is another thing I want to throw out there, Ryan. The reports that come out ahead of free agency on what teams are going to do with their own players that are under contract, it's almost like I kind of take it with a grain of salt, because it's like, tell me what this thing looks like on the other side of the free agency and the draft, what we land. And now I'm talking about maybe a different complete story around a player because of that. And I don't think it's all about the 2026 NFL draft for the Bills. I think getting loaded up on 2027 capital is almost just as important, because you want to try to be mobile. If you are able to go up and get a true difference maker in a draft that a lot of people think is going to be a little bit more top heavy, that's the draft when you want more capital. You go back to 2018 when the Bills started kind of setting the table for that with all of their offseason moves that year to kind of gather as much capital as they can. But I like Onyemata as kind of like a next tier. And then if you go a lower tier down, Sebastian Joseph Day is a guy that they've been flirting with for years. To me, he's kind of a perfect fit for what they want to do in a 3-4 scheme at nose tackle. Boom. That could be the easy idea, especially if they're going to bring in Franklin Myers in Tennessee and he doesn't return there.
Yeah, Sebastian Day would actually be a great addition in terms of the price point, in terms of the ability, the fact that the Bills have shown interest in him before. He's come here on a visit, if I remember correctly, a few years ago. So a new scheme, new system, still a tremendous fit, probably even a better fit for what Jim Leonard's trying to do with that defense. So he would be a great addition based on the price point. Not a big swing, but sometimes a good fit is better than a big swing.
Do you have any more tackles you want to get into here before we move maybe outside of the?
I saw Roy Lopez in the chat here, and would not be a bad addition. About 312 pounds. Good players. Again, price point I think would probably be something where the Bills would be able to entertain that thought. So that's probably it for me. We can kind of move on to where you want now.
All right, so let's go to maybe the linebacker next, because that to me is very interesting. I talked about this on our show on Saturday, where I could see the Bills maybe balking at some of the names that we're going to probably discuss here, depending on the number, because of the depth in the draft. Now, it's kind of a two-sided story as well. Like, of course, that logically makes sense, but are you going to be confident that the guy that you land in the draft is going to be a day one contributor? There might be somebody in free agency that you're much more confident can come in here and play right away. You have Terrell Bernard and you have Dorian Williams. I don't know if Terrell Bernard, even at this point, is written in marker anywhere, it fitting
Right.
into this defense. So if that's the case, you may have to consider some linebackers. And there's a host of names. I think the best place to start is probably Alex Singleton, Justin Strnad out of Denver because of the familiarity with Jim Leonhard, being with him for the last 2 years. I think they do different things. I think the price point on both of those guys is probably going to be pretty reasonable. Strnad is somebody that maybe doesn't play a ton there, hasn't over the last couple of years, but there's been stretches where he's been really productive. And so those are the kinds of things that you probably want to buy into. They do different things. Your top candidate, though, is a name from Jim Leonhard's past.
Yeah, Leo Chanel. And, real quick, though, on Singleton, one of those two guys, in my opinion, would be a home run for the Bills. It's the familiarity with Jim Leonhard. It's in Alex Singleton's case, the guy is a tackling machine, 120 tackles or more in 5 of the last 6 seasons, knows the ball. Older player, yes, but his career going through adversity, not sticking on NFL rosters, going to the CFL, breaking out there, coming back. And then, the last, like I said, 6 years, really making a name for himself. He is someone that can come in here, would know the system, would be able to teach to the guys. And then Leo Chanel is someone that played for Jim Leonhard in Jim Leonhard's system in Wisconsin, where that's where he really made a name for himself. That's how he ended up becoming that mid-round pick for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think a much bigger opportunity would be here in Buffalo for Leo Chanel. I want there to be a player that can call Jim Leonhard's defense. And I think both of those players can do it. When you look back at when Sean McDermott first took over as head coach, maybe he didn't always bring in the superstar type of player from Carolina, but man, did he ever bring in a ton of guys from Carolina that knew his system, that could teach it to others, that could be, whether it was a depth player, a starter, whatever it was, but could come in here and fill an important role. And that's exactly what this defense needs under Jim Leonhard. 1 or 2 guys that are familiar with him, whether that's from his Wisconsin days or can operate based on what Denver did the last few years, because Leonhard was not the DC there, but he had his fingerprints all over that defensive scheme.
To me, what I get really excited about for like a Chanel is what he could potentially mean for Dorian Williams next to him. Because I think Dorian Williams is like this stick of dynamite that has the potential of going off here under Jim Leonhard's defense. When Joe Brady was asked last week about, and it was by me, so I asked the question, is there any guys after studying the tape for the last 6 weeks with Jim Leonhard that he's kind of sat back in any of these meetings with you and said, man, I got big plans for this guy? And Joe Brady giggled and said, yeah, there are some guys. And I'm like, oh, who are they? And he's like, well, I'm not going to get into that, but there are some guys on this roster. My sense is that, from all the conversations I've had, putting the pieces together, I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys isn't Dorian Williams. He is a hair on fire, electric player that I think can be developed now with some new coaches. And, where has he kind of shined the most at times? Sure, he's had a lot of tackles. He did it 2 years ago leading the team. He's somebody that I think at times has even been pretty good in coverage. But I think he could also be unlocked as maybe like a rusher, whether it's off the edge at times, through the different gaps in the middle. Like, he is an energetic player. And I think combined with Leo Chanel, that could be really interesting. I still fail to see the path to where Terrell Bernard fits in all of this. I don't think he's going to be a stand-up edge backer on the outside. He just doesn't have the arm length for that. Could he be somebody that they asked to play the big nickel role as an undersized linebacker? That could be a really creative way to use him. Is he going to get on the field enough in that situation at the price point? If you were to tell me that they end up trading Terrell Bernard at some point this offseason, it wouldn't shock me. It'll all depend as we move through free agency and get closer to the draft. Who are some of the players they're bringing in? How heavy do they go at linebacker? Are they going to bring in a couple of guys?
And I think they are, whether that's free agency or the draft. And you can go to Jack Sanborn, again, another linebacker that played for Jim Leonhard at Wisconsin. Now, he is more of a depth guy, in my opinion, not someone I would necessarily want out there starting in this new scheme, but knows the system. You've got to add a few via free agency, and there's going to be different price points for these guys. Some of them are going to be in that first wave. I don't think Leo Chanel is going to break the bank necessarily, Matt, but he's going to cost a lot more than some of the other players that maybe Jim Leonard might sit there and say, okay, in the third wave of free agency, this guy might really fit our scheme. And then you look at the draft, and there's a ton of really good linebackers in this draft class. And I can't remember the Bills ever doing a pre-draft visit this early before, but they had a pre-draft visit today with a linebacker out of Missouri, Josiah Trotter, the son of Jeremiah Trotter Sr., someone that has played his way to being a day 2 pick. He was only a sophomore this past season at Missouri when he declared for the draft, but has drawn good comparisons. Lance Zierlein has compared him to Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs, a very good player. So I think it's going to be a mix. You're going to draft at least one linebacker, but I think 2 is very realistic. You're going to add a few via free agency as well. And then the Bills obviously have a few guys on this roster that, like Dorian Williams, I think can get plugged in and maybe assume a larger role than he's ever been given the opportunity to have.
Good question from Roy Collins. How often in the new scheme would there actually be 4 linebackers on the field at once? Probably not very often, like 4 prototypical linebackers, because you got to bake in. There's going to be times, like I was watching a lot of the 3-4 defense that the Rams have run over the last couple of years, kind of trying to get an idea of how Michael Hoyt would fit into it. But I saw a couple of different things. Christian Roseboom was there a couple of years ago. He's a free agent target, maybe somebody that can fit in. He's kind of like a more inside linebacker that can fit in. At times, you're going to probably see when Hoyt is back, Hoyt on one edge, Greg Rousseau as the other edge, acting as 2 of your like outside linebackers.
Right.
And then the inside, you could have Ed Oliver, Deion Walker, and maybe even a Sebastian Joseph Day or Jonathan Franklin Myers or a Roy Lopez. Like you could have any kind of conglomerate, a TJ Sanders, any conglomeration of the inside 3. But like in terms of like 4 like linebackers, I don't think you're going to see that very often at all.
Not true linebackers, no, in the sense that you're talking about, because you're right. When you have Rousseau taking on one of those roles, Hoyt taking on one of those roles, seeing 4 true linebackers isn't always going to be the case, or very rarely will that be the case.
Good question here. I'm going to look it up. Mike Evans' drop rate. Is that something that you kind of think of when you think of Mike Evans? A lot of drops. It's not something that I have, but I'm going to look it up real quick as we talk about it.
It's not, but I've seen a few games. I think on the injury is what sticks out in my mind, where he went up for a ball, came down and dropped that one. It was a tough play for him, but he had it in his hands at one point. But no, he's not someone I necessarily think of when I think of drops. But that being said, I can't sit here and say that he's someone that I've monitored in terms of his drop rate, because he has been with the Buccaneers his entire career. I haven't ever thought of him up until this current offseason, I should say, really considering leaving. So he's not a player I've done a ton of due diligence on as a target for the Bills up until now. But no, that's not something I associate necessarily with Mike Evans.
He had 2 drops last season, 4 drops the year before. I don't think he's ever been near a 50% drop rate. Like that would be
right.
percent catch rate is like, that would be like the worst in the league, I think, or close to it. So I don't think that's really been an issue necessarily for Mike Evans. Listen, he's one of the greatest wide receivers of his generation. And listen, I know he's an older player, but I think what you'd be getting and signing up for in a free agent class that just doesn't blow your hair back. Listen, I don't dislike Romeo Doubs. I want to make sure that people know that. I just think for what I think he's eventually going to get paid, it's going to be a little bit more than I'm comfortable paying for a very much middle of the road wide receiver that's kind of been up and down over the course of career. And it's frustrating too, because he'll have games, Romeo Doubs, where he looks like a dude. And then you'll go 2 or 3 games and you'll look up and you'll be like, was he playing? Did he miss the game? Oh, he was. He played 60 snaps, but he got 2 targets in the game. It's like the Bills have done that before. They've done that kind of projection business. And I think Mike Evans is much less of a projection.
Right. There's so much more of a, he's so much more of a proven entity based on what we've seen throughout his career. I know he's getting older. I've seen a lot of comments in here saying, no more older players. They've also used injured, but really last year was his first season where he was truly injured and missed significant time. He's just someone that you know what you're going to get when he's on the field, and he's going to be that consistent presence. He may not have to draw, a cornerback that's going to follow him at this point in his career, but he's still going to draw a lot of attention and make life easier for Khalil Shakir and even Keon Coleman and some of the other guys that are on this roster and or will be added to this roster via draft or even in free agency.
Yeah, his catch percentage was 48.4% last season, according to Pro Football Reference, which is shocking to me. I'm looking at that. He's had a couple seasons of in the 60s, a bunch in the 50s over the course of his career, but the drop numbers, Ryan, they're not very high. So I'm wondering where they get that number from.
Yeah, I have not seen that either, so I'm not quite sure.
All right, let's move on here. We're cooking here, 35 minutes in. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Shout. We're going through some of the free agent targets, and I think the best place to go to from here, I want to get to the edge and the safety and safety groups, and we could talk about a couple of options in both. For a while there, I felt like, to me, Boye Mafe was the top of the list for me because I have some reservations about Trey Hendrickson, and that's coming from a guy that was really on board with a trade for him over the last couple of years. I think he's going to get a lot of money because of his position. I think he's more of a fit for a 4-3 defense than he is necessarily in this defense. And I think a guy like Mafe, who could end up making, I don't know, half of what we're looking for Hendrickson to get on the open market. He could get somewhere around 30 to 35 million per season. Mafe could come in at somewhere between 15 and 20. We'll see where that ends up ranking. Is there any other names that you're kind of high on in the edge class, or one of those guys where you'd like the Bills to do their shopping?
Yeah, it might be where they have to do some shopping. It might be if there's the right trade opportunity or the draft, but Trey Hendrickson has been that name that we've linked to the Bills the last few off seasons where he's wanted to get out of Cincinnati, and then with the franchise tag, everything else, he's finally going to get that opportunity. But you do have to factor in the age, injury possibilities. Does he really fit this scheme versus what the Bills had been running under Sean McDermott? And Jim Leonard might sit there and say, yes, he absolutely fits, and I would love to have him, and maybe the Bills do pursue him. But going younger, Boye Mafe makes a lot of sense to me. A talented player, a bigger role here, maybe in Buffalo, more opportunity, I would argue. And, that's what it comes down to me is when Jim Leonard is sitting there giving his opinions to Brandon Beane in the front office here ahead of free agency. He knows that they can't go out and get a ton of premier free agents. There has to be players that are in tier 2, tier 3 on the regular. But if he wants to go out and add a splash player and Boye Mafe is near the top of his list, then yeah, go out and add a player of that caliber. It's going to be intriguing to see who the Bills do sign, whether it's early or later on, because full well that whoever the Bills target, these are players that Jim Leonard pretty much probably went to Brandon Beane and said, these are the guys that I want. Try to make it work with the cap space, which, change of topic, man, a little surprised the Bills haven't made more moves yet to free up cap space. I know they still have time, but you think that there would be
they typically, I feel like their moves sometimes take days to come out.
Right.
So like they might have done a lot of the work already, but nobody's talking, and eventually it starts to kind of come out. But even the Josh Allen, to your point, the Josh Allen restructure, like that seems like a slam dunk home run. Why wouldn't you do it?
Right. Send him the fax, have him sign it, fax it back, and call it good.
What's the other big move you're expecting? Is it maybe an Oliver extension based on the reports?
I mean, possibly based on the fact that they're not taking, or they're not really fielding calls for trading him. That's certainly possible. Those two things make sense. And then there's the obvious. There's going to be the cuts to Curtis Samuel and Taylor Rapp, but those guys also aren't going to be all of a sudden making you more than just being cap compliant. You're not saving a ton of money. but you're saving a decent chunk by getting rid of guys like that. So yeah, there needs to be some extensions, and Oliver, in terms of his ability and if they feel like he is a good fit for this scheme, makes the most sense.
The other one too is Dawson Knox. That whatever ends up happening with that is going to free up a chunk, whether it's an extension, a new deal, a pay cut, an outright release. That to me, that's another one, that a lever that can be pulled, or potentially the Deion Dawkins extension, which is another thing that we've talked quite a bit about. But I'd imagine we'll start to hear those over the next couple of days. Couple more names that I want to throw out there as potential edge targets, and none of them are super spicy. One in particular, former, I believe it was second-round pick out of Georgia, Azeez Ojulari. I remember talking about him quite a bit. Wasn't necessarily a fit in Sean McDermott's defense, but becomes much more of a fit in the 3-4, where he can kind of be a stand-up rushing linebacker, kind of a specialist, if you will. Not going to cost very much. And then I kind of put him in the same bucket. What about Von Miller? Running it back with him. I think I've been talking to a couple teams, maybe trying to return to Denver. I like the Malcolm Kuntz idea, obviously, as well. He's somebody that's been talked about a few times, but I went back and watched some of Von Miller with Washington last year. It didn't fall off of a cliff, man. Like there were still some plays where he was getting after the quarterback. That could be a super low-cost idea that gets you another, stand-up, prototypical 3-4 edge rusher.
Von Miller, probably, at least the reports I've seen, he really wants to return to like a Denver Broncos, which I don't know if they can make that work or if it makes sense or not. But no, Von Miller, I would say, other than his first year in Buffalo, he looked pretty good in Washington compared to his other seasons here in Buffalo. And obviously, after the first year, he was rehabbing, coming back from a serious injury, but he did show some juice in Washington. Azeez is what's interesting to me, and different circumstance because the Bills traded for Jerry Hughes years ago. But like, is this just a player that maybe was miscast, not in the right fit, right mold, right system? Can you bring him in here to Buffalo, or maybe in Jim Leonard's defense, you can unlock those traits that made him a higher pick for the Giants way back when? Still 25 years old, I believe, mid-20s. I would like them to go in and bring in those low-risk, high-reward type of players, because he's not going to get a major contract, in my opinion. And the talent is certainly there. He has certain traits where I think maybe Jim Leonard can get the best out of him. So, yeah, a player like that I like. I'm not as high on the Von Miller idea just based on been there, done that. But you're right. He wasn't bad last year in Washington. It's not worth, I'm not against them at least revisiting the idea, but wouldn't be as high as some of these younger names. And there's a few good ones here. Kwity Paye is another one, a former high pick. Kuntz is, I think, late 20s. Mafe we've talked about. So, yeah, there are guys to be had for sure.
The safety market's going to be super interesting. I'm going to throw out a couple of names. The most easy to connect to the Bills is PJ Locke, who's been in Denver the last couple of years, works specifically with Jim Leonard. That would make a ton of sense. And I think the price point on that will probably be pretty low. And that's something you could probably attack the second wave of free agency. I mean, there's some guys at the top of the list. If I was going like big dart, middle of the board, I think Kevin Byard still has some juice left. And I think if you're thinking about a guy that fits perfectly next to Cole Bishop, Byard is the guy that I think, as a ball hawk, is the guy that I would love back there that would allow Cole Bishop to play up into the box a little bit more. Right. He's somebody, depending on the price, that I think would be fun. I like Jaquan Brisker as well. Watching him at the joint practice in Chicago this past offseason, this past preseason, I really liked him a ton. And then the other one, I've been on this for a few weeks now, Reed Blankenship. He's kind of middle of the road when it comes to like some of these safety rankings in free agency. He's a really nice player. I like Nick Cross as well. He's more of a box guy that would push Bishop backwards. But if you really like him and the numbers right, I think there's a plenty of free agent safeties. And then, of course, the draft class of this safety group is really good as well.
So here's the thing. I think that the Bills can be patient with safety in terms of they don't have to be ultra aggressive to try to add one of the top guys necessarily because this draft class is so strong. There's going to be some pretty good safeties that are sitting out there in the second wave, even the third wave of free agency, where you can maybe sign one of them pre-draft or know full well there's going to be maybe a handful of guys. I think Lott could be a safety that doesn't get sign until post draft, where you can have him in your plans if you don't get the guy that you want in this year's draft. But man, that draft class is deep at safety as well. So if there's one position where I feel like the Bills are going to be able to address it and not have to worry about it, it's certainly the safety position based on the talent that's available in free agency and then this draft class just being absolutely loaded.
And we're already at 45 minutes. We got to hit offensive linemen and the Bills free agents real quick. I want to keep this under an hour, so let's keep this moving along. And we'll if there's big news, there's a couple of guys that have been released. Jonathan Grenard of Minnesota is rumored to be available via trade, could become a free agent. We'll probably do some emergency pods on specific guys over the next couple of days and how it fits with the Bills, just because we don't have a ton of time to get into it now. I want to shift gears to the offensive line because one of the things, just talking to people in Indianapolis last week, I went into the week and pretty much all offseason, I thought if you were asking me to project who is more likely to be brought back between Connor McGovern and David Edwards, I'd have said McGovern almost 95% of the time. I had an interesting conversation with somebody very connected in the free agency world, if you will, that made a really compelling argument as to why David Edwards might be the guy that ends up getting re-signed. If you listen to Aaron Cromer on Eric Wood's podcast over the last couple of days, talking up the brilliance of Edwards and how much was on his plate and how much responsibility he had for this offensive line, that's pretty interesting. And the guy that I was talking to in Indy said, I don't think the market's going to be nearly as high for Edwards as people think. We're talking about 20 million per season. He thinks it's going to be a lot closer to 12, 10 million per season that ends up getting over the finish line with David Edwards. So if you end up bringing back Edwards, and his other argument was, and I don't know where I fall in this, and I want to get your thoughts, the Bills drafted Cedric Van Peren Granger in the 5th round a couple of years ago. And maybe the thought is letting McGovern go because you've seen enough internally in Van Peren Granger to hand the job over to him. I'd be hesitant to do that, but maybe there's belief in the building that he's ready to kind of take that job.
Yeah, and obviously there have been some coaches that have been retained. Joe Brady's been there. They have a better view in terms of how ready Cedric Van Peren Granger is. There's been some injuries early in his career, some other opportunities that he hasn't been able to maybe make the most of. Obviously, McGovern was excellent at center as well. So the opportunities in terms of getting in there and actually getting to play haven't been there in actual meaningful snaps. But it's very possible the Bills have sat there and said, okay, we've seen enough from this guy in 2 years where we feel confident he can be a starter on this team if we can't bring back Connor McGovern or if we're just going to let him walk away. The center position is interesting. There's been a lot of releases in the last week, but then there's also the Bears losing their center today to retirement. So it's still kind of becoming more of a flooded market where maybe McGovern's asking price has to go down a little bit because there are other starters. And I would still argue he's one of the best, if not the best center available on the market. But maybe his asking price goes down, and that's why the Bills then maybe consider bringing him back. When it comes to David Edwards, I'm right there with you. I would have said 100% of the time McGovern would have been the one I thought would come back over David Edwards. But listening to Aaron Cromer and saying how intelligent he was, how he was calling things, how vital he was to the blocking scheme in Buffalo, it did open my eyes to the fact that maybe most likely probably the Bills feel the same way based on what they've seen out of him in the last few years. And if his market truly is closer to 12 or 13 million than the projections of 18 to 20, the Bills might just sit there and say that value based on what he's done is more important, because then you still have Van Peren Granger at center, Alec Anderson who can play center. You have the draft where you can address it. You can bring in a veteran in one of these final waves of free agency. So there are other options to be had rather than maybe going out and going expensive at that position.
I want to hear from you on, I don't want to steal any of your thunder on some low end offensive lineman interior options, but I'm going to say, why don't we go one for one? That way we can maybe get to some of our favorite targets for, some of these might be early in free agency. Last year, I mean, Kendrick Green was signed, I think, on day 1 or day 2. So that could be an option for some of these guys. And Connor McGovern a couple of years ago was an early in free agency addition. So for me, the top of the list, and it's a scary one because the guy has had unbelievable injury issues. He missed all of last season, tore his bicep, I believe, or something early in September in a practice, which, there might be some PTSD for the Bills because they had so many practice injuries last year and they might not consider it. But Elijah Vera Tucker, a former first-round pick, as an interior offensive lineman, to me, that's something at the price point that you're probably going to be able to get him at, get you out of bed and get you pretty excited. He could probably play on both sides. He's somebody that, his blocking metrics are off the charts when he's been able to actually played 15 games 2 years ago, missed all of last season. But I think those are the kind of guys, those are the kind of swings, the value swings with huge upside that you probably want to take if you're Brandon Beane. And I'd probably sign up for that, even though I'd be worried about the injury history. I think you're excited about Alec Anderson as some depth and Tylen Grable as some depth. And you could maybe take a chance on somebody that has an injury history.
AVT would be a dream addition. I'm thinking he'd want to sign a 1-year deal somewhere, rebuild his stock, his value, show that he can stay healthy. It's not a talent issue with him. It's the availability and the injuries. And that's what has derailed him and why he's, not a guy that was signed to a multi-year deal by the Jets, where the talent level tells you he's good enough to be that type of player. So, yeah, he's definitely someone that if the price is right and you can get him on a 1-year deal, absolutely in favor of that. I'm kind of going through the list now. There's just such a wide variety of older players and then some unproven ones. You would love Wyatt Teller to come back, but how much is he going to cost? He's probably one of
another injury concern, right?
Another injury concern, but he's been available a lot more over the course of his career than an AVT. And he's, the guy that got away from Buffalo because Brandon Beane felt like they had enough. And instead of keeping that younger player on the roster, trade him away. He goes on to start out his career brilliantly in Cleveland, earns at least some Pro Bowl nods there, if not an All-Pro. I feel like an All-Pro nod as well. So he would be someone that I would love to see come back to Buffalo, but what's the price point going to be?
Here's another name I'm going to throw out there. And listen, some of these I think at first are going to be like, oh, I don't know about that, right? Like when you start to think about some of the detracting parts of the potential addition. But this is one of the guys off of the Houston Texans offensive line last year. They're obviously making wholesale changes once again this offseason. They traded Titus Howard earlier this week. But Ed Ingram, former second-round pick out of LSU, is somebody I think is really interesting. He started off his career in Minnesota and didn't really go well, ends up going to Houston last year and probably arguably had the best season of his career. I think the number is going to be pretty low, probably similar to Vera Tucker in wanting to sign a 1-year deal, kind of a prove-it style deal. He was really good as a run blocker this year. And then I think you could try to develop him a little bit as a pass blocker. Nobody on that Houston Texans team was good as a pass blocker, but you get him in here as a guard, maybe let him develop a little bit. And that part of his game was supposed to be better at that coming out of LSU into the league. Just another name to throw out there.
Yeah, Cade Mays would be one more for me, center for Carolina. If the Bills want to just bring in another option to compete for that starting center job, if McGovern goes somewhere, I feel like he is someone that's more than capable of not just competing, but winning the job. If If you still have any kind of injuries that take place with Cedric Van Pran Granger, but let him compete with Van Pran Granger, Alec Anderson, and other guys internally on this team.
Tevin Jenkins, another one, started as a tackle with the Bears, moved over to guard with Cleveland, had a pretty good solid season last year. Definitely another name. Chris Paul, one of your favorites there, Ryan, over the years. He's another name to think about as well. Bills own free agent. We talked a bit about McGovern and Edwards. Don't have to rehash that. Is there a few that you think are going to be back? One that I thought was going to be gone that I've kind of flipped on is maybe Matt Milano. I wonder if they don't come to an agreement on a 1-year incentive-laden deal that gets him back in the door for not a huge cap hit, and they can ask him to play that other interior linebacker role, maybe with a Chenal or with somebody else like that. Listen, they could remake this whole thing, and maybe they're looking to bring in somebody that fits more, cleanly into the 3-4 defense. But if you're looking at coverage linebackers, I don't think you could do a lot better than Matt Milano, even at this stage in his career. So that's why I kind of am keeping the door open. I think Reggie Gilliam is a lock that they're going to try to bring him back. But outside of that, there's not a lot of guys that I think are going to be back in the building.
No, it's funny. I'm looking at my list. I started making a list of guys that ranking them based on who I think would be back, and I had Reggie Gilliam number 1. I'm fully expecting that. High on my list was Mitch Wisnowski. You need a punter, at least to compete for the job. I thought he did a really good job though. Once the Bills signed him and added him to this roster, I like him enough to come back and at least compete for the safety job. Oddly enough, 2 of the guys that they have brought back are very high on this list as well, being Sam Franklin, Fedarian Mathis. I had both of them on that list. And then as I go down it, we've had the conversations, the price point has to be right, but if it's similar to the 2 for $5, Mitch Trubisky coming back again for that 2.5, or even if you can get him like 2 for $4, even better. As long as the price point is in that range, I'm fine with it. I also, though, would not be torn. My heart would not be broken if the Bills finally did try to add a quarterback late in the draft with the developmental traits, based on what we've seen of Josh Allen's durability, knowing that you can have a veteran waiting in the wings on your practice squad. I would like to see them make that leap of faith here sooner rather than later in terms of a developmental quarterback prospect.
It's been almost an hour's worth of free agency preview. The time is almost here. I feel like news is going to be firing at a ferocious pace over the next couple of days and into next week. If you have not pulled the trigger on the 1-week free trial to become a Shout Insider, now is the time. We're going to be sending out our thoughts on moves that could potentially affect the Bills news, and how that's going to shape the lead up to free agency. 716-528-6727. Send a text. You get in for a 2-week free trial. It's only $3.99 a month. We have over 400 people that have been riding with us on the Insider text line for years now. And listen, it ebbs and flows in its busy seasons, but at $3.99 a month, just staying connected and a good place for us to throw a lot of stuff. Sometimes we throw in there that we don't throw out anywhere else, Ryan. So it's just a good time to get subscribed to that and be part of the fun.
Yeah, this is actually the perfect time to become a Shout Insider, because we have free agency, what we hear in terms of who the Bills could be targeting, who they were in on. Then you have top 30 visits, private workouts. We talk to you about that process. Even the schedule coming out here in a few months, what we hear about that, primetime games. Obviously, today we learned no international games, but anything that we hear, we generally put there first. They get the exclusive information or things that maybe we can't post about otherwise. So consider becoming a Shout Insider today.
The number is 716-528-6727. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you could just rewind it and write it down slowly if I went too fast there. So sorry about that. Or just go to joinsubtext.com/Shout Buffalo Bills. And that'll take you to a link, and you can sign up on there. And we're just going to be firing off a lot of takes, a lot of thoughts. It's an exciting time in Buffalo Bills land. For Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. We'll be back later this week. buckle up. Enjoy the week, everybody. Take care.